All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting of the Civilian Review Board in order. I would note that we are going to be without our city attorney counsel today, so any questions that we have for legal, we will keep note of, but then ask for Ms. Ross or Mr. Tobias to answer those at our next meeting. All right, hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to take a look at the minutes from the previous meetings. Does anyone have anything to add, any edits or corrections? No. Okay, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented. I move. May I have a second? Second. All in favor of accepting, please raise your hands. All right, motion carries. Minutes are accepted. All right, turn it over to the Inspector General.
I'll say good evening, or actually good afternoon. So before you is a summary of the complaints and investigations for the month of July that's sitting in front of you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Any questions that you have at this time, I don't really have any additional updates other than that information.
Does anyone have any questions for the Inspector General? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And now I'd like to turn it over to hear our very highly anticipated overview session from the Columbus Police Department.
Well, good afternoon and thank you. I'm here, Chief Elaine Bryant, and I also brought Assistant Chief Nick Convis with me as well. We are here to talk about what's going on, not only in the city, but in regards to some of the questions that were posed to us as it relates to the Civilian Review Board and the Inspector General's office. So if you'd like me to just get into some of the questions, I can do that.
The floor is yours, however you would like to best go about it.
Okay, so one of the questions that was posed is, what is the process for reviewing the final reports and recommendations that come from the board? So when we get the cases, they come to my office. Once they come to my office, I turn them over to the assistant chief who's in charge of our Internal Affairs Bureau. Internal Affairs takes those packages and they collect all the information, all the attachments and everything, and then they are, the packages are put together and sent to the chain of command for review per our policy. Once the chain of command does their review and makes a determination on the findings, then that is either adjudicated through discipline or whatever the recommendation is, it comes back up through their chain to do that. So in some cases, allegations are sustained. The chain of command will determine appropriate discipline in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement and the tracking system. What are the outcomes of the cases that have already been sent to the chief? There's a wide range of outcomes. Some are unfounded, some are not sustained, and some are sustained. Retraining and discipline have resulted for some of the sustained allegations as well. What are the outcomes of the policy recommendations that have been sent to the chief? We do track all the recommendations. Recommendations are reviewed by our Professional Standards Bureau, which is houses our research and development unit. We prepare a quarterly report with a variety of outcomes. Some recommendations result in our policies being updated and or changed. Other recommendations have not been implemented because we are already either doing it because the policy spells it out, or for reasons that we are not able to actually change the policy. Our policy, it undergoes a rigorous concurrence process, which is reviewed by all of our command staff, our legal team, human resources, and outside entities such as the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. Many of our policies are created in conjunction with expert clinicians and practitioners in various fields such as mental health, SWAT, bombs, medical emergencies, OVI. So we don't just do our policies in-house, we also look for external recommendations, including the board and as well. Can we create a process whereby the board receives periodic reports on the progress? Yes, we have created a quarterly report. We have a quarterly report not only for recommendations as it relates to policy, but we also have a quarterly report as it relates to the actual cases, whether the findings sustained, not sustained. We have just finished reviewing those quarterly reports. We have solidified them, and we are prepared to present them to the board. So going forward, we can present you with a quarterly report for both of those. Yes.
How detailed is the information in those reports? Like, how granular does it get?
So as it relates to the policy recommendations, it is in paragraph form, so it specifically talks about what your recommendation was, what we found, what we did with that. So it's in paragraph form, so you can see that. As it relates to the cases, I believe it's more Excel based. So it'll tell you whether it was sustained, whether it was not sustained, and what discipline or what came out of that, whether it was training and what type of discipline.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. What are benefits that we notice, if any, following the creation of this board? The one thing we can tell you is that by providing independent oversight, we find that the community feels more encouraged or freer to make complaints as it relates to officers and misconduct. So that is a benefit of having an independent review board. Also, another benefit from our side of the house, it gives our Internal Affairs Bureau personnel opportunity to focus on other areas of concern that they have outside of citizen complaints. The feedback that we hear from our officers on the review board, some of the feedback that we get is that there is an excessive amount of time that it takes to review the complaints as it relates to the Inspector General's office. Also, sometimes the officers feel that the cases are built on feelings and not actually policy or law. So that's just some of the feedback that we get from our officers. What in general is the feeling from CPD on having such a board process? I can tell you personally, coming from Detroit and having the same process in place, there was a Board of Police Commissioners as well as Office of the OCI. So I personally worked in that office where I investigated complaints that citizens made against police. It is a very beneficial thing to have in place. I think it's important to have an independent arm, so I think it is a benefit. I just think that there's some room for improvement as it relates to how cases are processed and the communication. So, what are the biggest challenges in Columbus for police-citizen relations? I think over the past 3 years, we've made some significant strides as it relates to community relations. We don't wave the flag. We know we still have a ways to go in improving those community relations. We're going to continue to do the things that we're doing. I think transparency is key and important in getting there. That's one of the reasons that we try to get the information out, even as it relates to officer-involved shootings or anything that is occurring, whether it's officer misconduct. We try to make sure we give the information to the public and to the community to the extent that we can without compromising the integrity of the investigation. So we're going to continue to be transparent. We're going to continue to encourage the community to report misconduct as it relates to officers or anyone for that matter, and continue to provide training to officers and attend programs in the community. So one of the questions was, how do we feel that the Civilian Review Board can be a part of the program or be a better liaison for the police department and the community? We know that I think there's one or two that have already went through our Citizens Police Academy. We would encourage members to go through the actual Citizens Police Academy. I think it would provide great insight into what the officers are learning, some of the things that they're doing. I think it's a beneficial tool to have some ride-alongs. And then as it relates to some of our community events that we're doing, to get out and come to those community events and actually have an opportunity to give information to the residents and to some of the community about what you do, what your purpose is, because sometimes some people still are not as clear about that. So I think it would be beneficial to do that as well. As it relates to implicit bias in our cultural competence training and our use of force training module, I can tell you that training already exists. We also exceed our state mandated hour requirements in implicit bias. The state only requires 740, but we, as a division, we provide 1,250. We also exceed in our mental health training as well. We're always continuously looking for ways to improve that, and we're always looking across the country at best practices to make sure that we're keeping up with that. And if there is any additional training that we can provide to our members, we do that as well. Assistant Chief Convis is also over our training bureau, so he's always looking, him and his team, to see if there's anything out there that could benefit our department, and whether it's sending our officers to training outside or bringing someone in to be able to provide that for us. Are there or should there be different policies or procedures regarding use of force when it comes to mental health crisis? Again, I can tell you officers are training on various mental health topics on a regular basis. We are constantly reviewing our policies to ensure we're staying in on and up to date on best practices. Policies go through a rigorous review and are rooted in statutory law, case law, accreditation standards. All policies are required to undergo review on a regular basis for CALIA accreditation, and we're going to continue to champion alternative responses units to deal with involving mental health crisis. So we have our mobile crisis response team, as you know. We have the right response, so we're going to continue to try to grow those programs and make sure that we're providing what the community needs as it relates to mental health crisis. Do we have a system for tracking cases? Yes, all cases are tracked in our reporting management system. So all of our cases are tracked, whether they're IAB cases, whether they're Inspector General cases, whether they're command cases. We track all our cases in our records management system. And the process for us to contact a civilian as it relates to having in custody items, our property management team sends a letter to the owner every 90 days. If contact information is available. Sometimes we have to send that letter on multiple occasions. We don't just necessarily do it one time. If we don't get a response, we'll then in turn do it multiple times. If the property is unclaimed and it's forfeited, then we have to dispose of it as governed by the Ohio Revised Code. So then we follow policy. I can talk to you about the body-worn cameras as it relates to special duty. I know this is a very hot topic. What I can tell you is this, the Division of Police as well as the Safety Director's Office and the Mayor's Office, we all want the same thing. We would love for all of our officers to wear body-worn cameras, even for special duty. The challenge that we have, and we're working through that, is that if we're going to mandate it, we have to also be able to provide it. So we're in the process of securing funding to make sure that we're able to have the right amount of body-worn cameras so that we can then mandate them to be able to wear them for special duty. Because right now, as it relates to their on-duty, the body-worn cameras, batteries have a life expectancy of about 8 to 10 hours. So, of course, when they're wearing them on duty, if they then have to charge them, they won't have them if they're going right to special duty. So in order for us to mandate it, we as a division or we as a city have to make sure that we are able to provide them at all times. So we're working with the Safety Director's Office and the Mayor's Office to purchase additional body-worn cameras. And the moment that we have enough, we're going to put it in policy that they are mandated to wear them. And what I can tell you is we encourage officers now, if you have them, wear them for special duty. So what you will see is there are a lot of officers that do wear body-worn cameras for special duty. They actually want to have them as well. They protect them as well. So they do want them. So as soon as we have the amount that we need to be able to mandate, that is going to happen, and that should be very soon. And the corrective action as it relates to police officers who repeatedly do not turn on their body-worn cameras, as you know, there are steps for that. So first violation may result in retraining, positive corrective action, or the first level of formal discipline. Discipline gets higher as the offenses become repetitive. So you may have a second level, could be a written reprimand. Third level could be departmental charges that can result in various suspensions, demotions, and depending on the gravity, a possible termination. We can tell you, we'd have to get to a specific case, but there are levels to that. So if you have an officer that does it, and then a month later they do it, and then 2 months later they do it, what you will see is that the discipline will get higher and higher, and to a point where, we have to ultimately make a decision about this officer's ability to be able to function and do what he or she needs to do. we have a collective bargaining agreement which requires that we follow that principle. So it's not just a matter of us making that decision, so we have to follow our own collective bargaining agreement and our process, which is why we have those levels of discipline. So we do utilize a discipline tracking system too to ensure equity in our discipline as it relates to the officers. So at this time, I will answer any questions, additional questions you may have.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh, okay. Thanks for that. It's really great to have you here. And for those of us serving for the last several years, it's been long anticipated, so it's great. You mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to just maybe have you expand on for a moment. One was you think there's room for improvement for the Department of Inspector General, and what are those things that you think are rooms for improvement?
As it relates to
You
community
said
relations or
under
investigations?
what is the general feeling from CPD from having such a board or process? And you said you think there's room for improvement. That was one. So what?
So
the
as
things
it relates to, I think that obviously with this being new for a lot of people, it's only been in effect for a few years. So, we're all learning, we're all growing in this process. But as it relates to specifically investigations, I think that, we do have a time frame as it relates to when investigations are to be completed. And I know that sometimes there are going to be extenuating circumstances that may require investigation to go a little longer, but I think that we have to find a way to be able to expedite and complete these investigations in a more timely manner, because a lot of times these investigations are hanging over these officers' heads, and we're talking sometimes a year and a half. That's excessive to have an officer waiting to make a determination about whether it's demeanor or a low-level use of force. So we're just trying to figure out how we can expedite the process as it relates to completing these investigations in a more timely manner.
Well,
What's
I'm sorry, may I follow up?
I was just going to ask, what's the IAB turnaround look like? And is that somehow related to kind of perceptions of CPD about the board's turnaround?
Well, it's all the same, regardless of whether the board does it or not. We still have to follow the collective bargaining agreement, which is 90 days. So, and that's typically when you talk about a typical case with no extenuating circumstances. We're looking at about 90 days.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Maybe our Inspector General can speak to that. I'm under the impression that we're turning the cases around within the statutory time frame of 90 days. Is that not the case?
No. To your point, that is the case in our office. We are turning the investigations around within 90 days and submitting them to the board.
Right.
There are times that we do ask for extension, but what the chief may be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what she may be referring to is the fact, even though we complete the cases, the board was new. So remember, the cases that we were completing and submitting to the board that first year, the board didn't restart reviewing those cases, I believe, until the very beginning of 2023. So even though we may have closed those within 90 days, they still sat before the board had a chance to review. That still adds to the timeline of when those cases are submitted to the chief's office. So
You mean
even though
cases from 2022, but in the last year and a half, has that at all happened?
No, I believe since the board has been reviewing the cases, and we can definitely put some stats to that, and I think we did that in our, when I did that annual report, that now, since the board has started reviewing the cases in 2023 and then getting into 2024, the turnaround is a lot faster turnaround. So we're closing them in 90 days. They go to the board. The board usually is doing their review within at least the 30 days, and then those cases are going for. So they're not, the first cases definitely, it just took a long time, but that, again, was the process that we were developing, and it took the board, time to kind of get that. But right now, I don't think that's the case. I think the timeliness is a lot better, and I can definitely, again, provide that information. So the chief is speaking, but they may be speaking based on cases initially that were done in 2022 and 2023.
So I'll help explain this a little bit. So the IAB process is once an investigation is completed within the contractual timelines, it immediately, with the findings, the recommended findings, goes to the chain of command immediately. The difference being now here is that once the investigation is complete, then there is a delay of 30, 60, however long it is for you all to review it. Then, once it's reviewed and you guys decide whether you want to accept the findings or go against that, make recommendations, whatever it is that happens with the case, then there's a period of time where the final reports have to be signed and prepared and then shipped over. And then they go to IAB. And then IAB has to assemble the packages with all the evidentiary pieces because the chain of command must have all the evidence when they're reviewing the case so they can make proper informed decisions on the cases. Then it starts the review process. So it does extend it very extensively. And we have cases where sometimes alleged conduct is alleged, it's investigated, and our officers are not getting a final resolution until a year later. The problem on our side being that if an officer has committed a violation of our policies, we would like to discipline them as quickly as possible to correct the behavior. Additionally, our officers truly do care when they have a complaint against them. That bothers them, which is a good thing. They care that they're doing the right thing at work. And so then it stays above their head and hangs out there for an extended period of time in the unknown without updates of where it's at. And so it has increased it substantially for final resolution of the cases.
Do we know what the time frame is typically from when the board, like I'm the one who signs the reports and then Stephanie sends them over. Do we know what that time frame looks like from IAB to chain of command on our referred reports?
That's almost immediately.
So
Is it? Okay.
You're talking about once the case gets to me.
Yep.
I immediately give them to him, and they immediately work on getting them out. So that's not a,
Okay.
that's not a long time.
there's not even a day that goes by. Generally,
No.
they are sent to be in there immediately forward, and IAB has 2 sergeants dedicated to that, and they immediately start working and packaging all those and shipping them out as soon as they complete them. So it's pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that I spoke about with the officers and their feelings, just, and again, it's a work in progress, just some of the findings that, there's some things that we're finding in the investigations that are being missed as well. So we're just trying to work through that and make sure that the investigations are as thorough and complete as possible, so.
Thank you both so much for this. One of the questions I have is really getting a sense of, so we talked about timeline, ways to speed this up, trying to get the process in a way that works for everybody. Are there alternative suggestions you all have in mind? I mean, because we've been thinking through a couple of different ways that we can go through the process. Are there ways that we can simultaneously be doing some additional reviews in terms of after it gets to you all and you make your determination, we look at what's happening and what those decisions are? Because there's ways that we could move this process along. And so I just want to get a sense, are there other best practices elsewhere that you're seeing, or what would that look like?
I think that because you're going to get the case, you're going to review it, and you're going to make a determination on whether you want to send it back for your recommendations for additional information. If there was a way to do it concurrently, if there was a way that we could get the case and then send it through the chain while you're reviewing it, I don't know what that looks like, but that could possibly speed up the process. But that would depend on whether or not you were comfortable with the investigation as it stands and whether you wouldn't see anything major that would change prior to sending it to us.
And that's helpful because I think, usually, at least the way the process is like, and again, this is not the opinion of the board, this is my personal opinion, but the process works. We review the cases. Then as soon as we approve it, it gets sent off to you all in the chain of command and kind of runs through its process. And then let's say you all have found additional elements that, that weren't through the process that we didn't necessarily weigh in or see. There's nothing by that point that we're going to do as a civilian review board that we're going to do about it, because that it's at least the way it currently works. Like, we've already voted on it, we've moved on. I actually think it might be helpful is if there's some sort of concurrent process where we're then looking at your feedback, the feedback after you all are communicating, to make sure that everything is able to move along and we're not slowing things down either. So I just don't know what that might look like, but I think currently the way it works is, we usually, it's like 99% or so agree with the findings of the IG, and then it moves on to you all, and then there may be a disagreement or agreement from there. But the way the process works, like, we don't want to slow things down further either. And I don't know what role we could play to move this process along.
One other suggestion, and this is going to help with, it'll be a minor saving of time, would be before, when IAB was completing investigations, when it went to the chain of command, it was a full packet ready to go within the 90 days. All the discs were all included, any printouts, all of that was packaged together. If those packages left the DIG and the Civilian Review Board complete, ready to go with all the attachments in the case file, we could just send them straight to the chains of command and would not spend a week or two assembling, dozens of printing, the various forms, putting things on discs, all that stuff. That is extra time. I mean, it's going to shave off a couple weeks, but that's a big deal to our officers, and I think it's important to try to streamline this as best we can for our personnel. So that would be just one minor change that might help. But we have to take into consideration staffing challenges, and I don't know what the staffing challenges are in the DIG office, but it's a balance.
I have a question regarding the quarterly reports. If a complaint is substantiated by the Civilian Review Board and then substantiated by the chain of command, and either training or counseling or discipline is recommended, will it get on the report? Will it become more specific than just training or counseling? Will we know, because we have some complaints that are just very, very minor. We have to substantiate it because the policy or the directive indicates that we need to do this, so we do it. But when we review the report, the officer clearly understands, you can tell he's learned a lesson, he's going on, and it's all good. But there are, we've seen one or two complaints where substantial counseling or training, is needed. So it would be kind of nice to see what is, rather than just having counseling or training, but what sort, maybe more specific, because once in a while you see one or two complaints that you're more concerned about, but a good 95% of them probably we're good with it. I'm good with it. So I'm wondering, will we see more specifics other than just training?
So the way that the reports work right now, we have a report management system. So we must work within the parameters of that report management system and what options we have available to us. And it's very difficult to create different things within, we have to contact the vendor, have them come out, pay, and some of the capabilities we just can't do some certain things. So right now, the way that it works is, we are able to document what the recommended finding was, the finding recommended from the board, when it comes over, and then what the final disposition of it was. Our training, retraining, comes in various forms. It might be a city class that they take at citywide training. It might be an outside class they take. It might be in-house training that we develop that's particular to an incident or something. It might be training that we offer if we see some type of issue or tactical issue, a big change we make, and that we use it in service out of an investigation. There's a variety of things, so there's really no drop-down menu that we can click and customize all that, because it would just, our IT doesn't allow that, but we can do the reports that show But generally, on the routing sheets, it's going to be documented exactly what happened, whether it was retraining a class. Sometimes the class will be mentioned if it's already in place. And you guys are welcome to request any specific, if there's a number you want, the routing sheet for any of that. That's all public record, and we're happy to release that. So you can see the comments on the routing sheet from the chain of command and why they were, sent to training or whatever it is.
Okay. We would request the routing sheet comments, you said?
Yeah,
Is that
the
correct?
comments on the routing sheet. It may give you a little bit more, but again, it's not going to give you the lesson plan from the training that the officer goes to for retraining. And then if it's formal discipline, that's pretty standard. We have a very standardized process, documenting constructive counseling, then a written reprimand, and then departmental charges pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
I'm coming back to the timeline concerns and some of the suggestions, not making any promises, because without Mr. Tobias here, he could tell me that this is not a thing that could be done. But if theoretically you all were to receive, the same time that we get the reports, if you all were to receive the packet and just have everything at that same time, and therefore you're just waiting on the final decision from the board, would that be helpful from both it puts everything together, but it also lets you at least see, hey, there's a potential sustained coming for this incident, and you're just waiting on a month later when we have the meeting about the report and we all read it, we vote. Would that be a helpful part of the process if that's possible for us to work, or?
I mean, anything would be helpful in terms of having the information, but, it would be even more helpful if we could do the concurrence, if we could actually send it to the chain to review and weigh in on. If you're saying that 95, 99% of the cases you agree with, it would be helpful if we were able to do that, but I understand. Just like Assistant Chief Conlon said, if we had a complete package, it would help us significantly in terms of being able to cut down some of the time.
The one concern I have with that is that once it goes to the chain of command, they're making their final recommendations. If the chain of command does not agree with a recommended finding, whether that comes from IA or that comes from the Civilian Review Board out of the DIG's office, our supervisors just can't go against that and say, nope, unfounded or exonerated or sustained. They must provide an analysis and base it in whatever case law, statutory law, policy, best practice of why they have to support their decision if they're going to go against what the recommended finding is, whether it's yours or internal affairs. And then the chain of command at each level will review that and decide whether or not they agree with that supervisor and the findings. And there's been a ton of them that you all have found either exonerated coming out of the DIG's office, but based on how that definition works, excessive force can't be exonerated. It can only be unfounded. And so things like that, sometimes they'll make changes like that. It's not always a difference of something is sustained to not sustained, or vice versa, where we think it's sustained, but you all found it's unfounded. There's other, options there too. So when it goes to the chain of command, the only way to save the time would be if they can make their final recommendations then, or else we're just still waiting for the process to run through here, so.
I guess where I'm trying to get a sense of it, because right now, and again, we're all trying to work this through, but it seems so disconnected. Like by the time it gets to us, then we hand it over, and then we usually don't really know what happens to it from there. And I'm just trying to figure out if there's a stage in which, I don't know if there's conversations with the DIG and with you all in terms of clarification or additional insights, because to us, it sounds like at times we may be weighing in on something without having all of the information. Obviously, there's the investigation pieces there. You all come up with a determination or your analysis. But by the time that decision is made, and then it's on to the next thing. And we then lose sight of, okay, what are the broader implications here specifically based on the decisions that were made from CPD? And that follow-up doesn't see, I don't know what the follow-up, I know the quarterly reports are helpful and that will be really helpful, but on a case-by-case basis, it doesn't, one, both for the officers, but also for the complainant, of somebody being able to see, here's what the determination was made from your case, here's what happened. I don't know how long that follow-up takes, and if there's a way to speed that up or to make sure that we have insight onto that process, I don't know. I'm just trying to get a sense, like, can we do that at any point?
Are you referring to the follow-up from the supervisor, from the chain of
It's
command?
Yes, so basically the supervisor says, I disagree or I agree, and then it goes to chain of command. But is there any sort of intervention point once the supervisor makes their analysis?
Well, the supervisor is the chain of command.
Okay.
So they are, when it goes down to the chain of command, it starts with their sergeant, and then it goes all the way up. Sergeant, lieutenant, commander, they all weigh in on the decision. So I guess it's kind of, I'm trying to understand. So you want to be able to weigh in after the chain of command looks at it.
I'm trying to figure out an additional intervention point beyond, like, are there ever conversations, for example, as you all mentioned, we believe that IG and the board missed X, Y, or Z here. Is there any sort of follow-up or conversation, or do you just do that and then just move on, goes to the chain of command, and that's that?
You want to know, you want to have the follow-up conversation regarding what may have been missed and
Something
not just
like that.
from a report, but an actual discussion.
Yeah, maybe, and obviously that it may not be feasible, obviously, for every case, but like trying to figure out ways that we can work a process that, folks are communicating, whether it's the review board or the DIG and you all, so that we don't have, consistent miscommunication along the way or different approaches, which may be the case. Like, you all go through your process, we have a different process here, but I do think there might be some points where further communication might actually be desired at a later point than what currently happens.
When there's concerns with investigations or things that have been missed, or sometimes like our officers or our supervisors will find and say, I wish this would have been asked because I think there's either a rule violation here or something would have exonerated an officer if this would have been asked. We will communicate that with the DIG office. We have a pretty open line of communication, and we're able to work through those issues for future cases. And the way that it looks now is completely different than when it started, which is a good thing because it was new for everyone, and we really had to wear that path down of what that was going to look like, the path forward. And so it's always a work in progress, feedback-wise, there. But some of the stuff, time frame-wise, I would be cautious to have another intervention point that's going to slow the process down even more for that.
More so thinking the intervention point being, if we decided the concurrent, it goes, the second it goes to us, it also goes to you all, thinking about where that intervention point could go to speed up that timeline. So I'm thinking about, is there a way to do this in a way that's more efficient, but also you can weigh in on a later process without slowing things down? Again, I don't know without having insight into how you do it, but I was not thinking about adding that to the existing process, but instead amending the way we do the current process to speed up and make that more efficiently, honestly, for the officer and the complainant.
If there's an appetite for that, I'm happy to sit down and try to come up with something or provide some informed, feedback that you all can work with to form something that works, within the confines of your expectations.
Okay.
Now, one more question. I was just curious if you're seeing any patterns where you disagree, whether you think that, hey, the DIG and the Civilian Review Board are missing things that the chain of command is picking up, or where you find that the DIG and the Civilian Review Board are sustaining actions that you think, the chain of command is saying, no, that's unfounded. Are there some patterns? I mean, one of the things that would be helpful for us is to learn from this process. So if we're consistently missing something, so that we're consistently doing something that the chain of command is saying, we're not going to agree to this approach in one direction or the other, that would be really helpful for us to get that reflection. Now, maybe the cases are so individually tailored that, no, there's no pattern. But if there were some patterns or some lessons, that would be really helpful to get feedback, that we were able to, for the DIG's office to say, because we're generally agreeing with the DIG. So if there's something that is being overturned or added all the time, or, often, it'd be great for all of us to know what that was.
I think the big thing is that appears to be missing is an understanding of case law. And a lot of what we do, so we can only write policy to cover so many interactions. I wish we could train every possible scenario an officer would run into in the academy. It would be amazing, but we can't. And there are times, for instance, consensual encounters, where an officer doesn't have a legal reason to stop somebody, but under case law is allowed to engage in a consensual encounter with somebody that develops into a reason for that officer to stop them. And we encourage proactive policing. So sometimes I think some findings come out possibly that case law was not taken into consideration, where we might have a policy that is somewhat on point. For instance, our bias-based policing policy. And we have case law then that governs our interactions with them. And if there's a consensual encounter that is permissible under case law, our officers, we require them to follow case law. And our officers regularly get legal updates. That is one awesome thing we do is we have an in-house legal advisor who provides consistent every couple months, brand new cases coming out. So we are always on the cutting edge of what officers can and can't do. But I think sometimes that's not taken into consideration, and the chain of command will then find and recognize that and say, we can't agree with this because case law allows the officer to do what the officer did, and we expect them to follow. So I think kind of maybe an immersion in some case law might be something that would be helpful, because that's really, case law governs almost every one of our interactions with an individual. And then policy kind of governs in conjunction, but then also those things when we're not necessarily interacting with somebody in the public. And maybe you get a complaint that an officer didn't classify a report properly, or something of that nature. That would be, obviously we'd fall back on policy.
Well, again, to the extent that you're not just observing something that's happening on a case-by-case basis, but rather you're seeing some patterns that we're missing, that this case governs this area, or, in one direction or another, it would be just helpful to have that reflection and say, gosh, you guys can improve. We don't have to keep going through this overturning or adding these charges that you're not getting. So I don't know if there is a pattern, but if there is, that would be helpful.
Yeah, again, I think that it would fall back to the case law has shown up in a couple different cases where it's come out sustained, but then we're like, well, case law points and allows us to do, our officers to do whatever it is that they did. So I don't know, possibly just reviewing some of that. And then obviously if we have a systemic issue with the investigation itself, whether it's a process issue or an interview issue or a questioning issue or scope issue, we will always reach out to the DIG and have that candid conversation, and that works very well for that.
So what we can do moving forward as well, in regards to your question, is we can look at specifically and start tracking if there is a certain policy that is continuously being cited for a particular multiple officers. And so we can start looking at that and we can have our R&D team or professional standards just kind of start looking to see if there is some sort of a pattern as it relates to a specific policy or specific action.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you talked about special duty cameras, which I appreciate that, because as you alluded to, we have had multiple conversations
Yes.
about body-worn camera. And I was curious, it sounds like that there is obviously the desire for that to be the case with CPD. It sounds like there is potentially with the city. You mentioned the safety director and the mayor. Do you know, one, and you probably don't have this figure handy, but I'm curious, estimate what is the cost to the city for everyone to be equipped for special duty? And it sounds like if the money exists or they can find it, that the city does agree with that. The mayor's
Yes,
office,
we,
correct?
well, we're working on that, and we actually did an analysis and looked at several different options on how we would be able to get this done. So we presented that to the safety director, and we are in the process of actually buying the specific amount of cameras. We're working on that. So and when I say that it should happen fairly soon, it should happen fairly soon. And once we actually get those in possession, we can then write policy and change it to make sure that we mandate that the officers have a camera for special duty.
That's great. And you may not know this, but is it fairly common in other cities similar size that they do wear cameras for special duty, or?
It varies across the
Yeah,
country.
it's different depending on where you go, and so I can't say specific right now.
But that's great. So, I'm sure we're all
But
glad to
we
hear that that
definitely,
is
we
in the upper
absolutely
half.
agree with you, because anything can happen, right? As we've seen before, so we would love for our officers to always be equipped with
That's great. Thank you. And thank you for your time today, too.
no problem.
Our officers love the body cams. We can't imagine policing without them now, because they are a protection of, the facts of every single interaction, and so it's a good thing.
It has been really great having both of you here today. Just two quick questions. Does your system have a way of tracking specific officers and keeping track of complaints, your database?
Absolutely.
You
Yeah,
do you do have that?
We have a
Okay.
master IAB database, basically, and that's how we're able to track through our employee action review system, where we will flag officers that have a substantially higher number of complaints, and then put them under a review of the EARS committee and come up to see if there's patterns, even if stuff's found within policy, to see if there were better tactics they could have used, and then send that to the chain of command and have them develop an action plan for the officer if there is a pattern there.
Okay. And this board has been here for probably approximately 3 or 4 years, I can't remember, but has the chain of command and the specific officers, what do you think of us now? I mean, what does the CPD think about us? Is this a good thing, in your opinion, or are we doing something here?
That's like I stated, before, we recognize that it is good to have an independent arm, to be able to, because sometimes you have people in the community that don't necessarily trust the police, but we still want them to feel comfortable and be able to make a complaint if they need to make a complaint. So to have an independent arm, to have someone that they can come to and be able to make a complaint, I think is extremely important. As it relates to us, CPD, I think that we also understand and recognize the importance and significance of being able to have someone independently be able to look at something, because it's not always about an aha, got you moment. There's a lot of times that you will look at cases and you will exonerate an officer or say that an officer was in policy. And I think coming from this board and coming from the IG's office, that it gives more credence to the fact that, that we were within policy or we did what we were supposed to do. So officers, I don't think, look at it as a bad thing. We don't hear a lot of negative comments about the Civilian Review Board or the IG's office as it relates to being in existence. But again, with it being new and just being a few years old, it's still evolving, it's still growing. And like I can tell you, coming from Detroit, they've been in existence almost 80 years. So they've had a long time to be able to work through their processes and go through a lot of different things. And all the officers had a chance. Every officer that is on the department now came when it was already in existence. Whereas in this case, we have a lot of officers that did not work under a Civilian Review Board or did not have that experience. So just learning, time, growing, and being able to develop where we need to be and have that communication.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I think part of that point around being an independent arm that I think is especially important when we talked about this concurrent process is that we have insight in terms of how the DIG does their investigation process. We spend all of our time doing that. We have very little insight in terms of how you all do your process, right? And I think what would be helpful, and this is extraordinarily helpful, but would be helpful is moving forward, thinking about ways, obviously within the contracts and within the laws, for us to have more insight into that process so that we can weigh in on the analysis that you all have, right? Because a point that you said was, case law is a big issue. There's a lot of things that are missed because that are within case law. But just like the statement around the patterns about tracking things that have come up, the issue that I think a lot of us run into is, there's a number of things that are within policy, within the law, but perhaps are not the best practices of how we move forward. And so really trying to shift to a position where we as a board can have that open line of communication about getting your analysis as well and thinking through that process, I think will ultimately, hopefully, lead to a better process for both officers and constituents as well.
The quarterly report, I think, is going to be helpful because it will provide detailed insight and analysis from our research and development team of why we can or cannot do a recommendation. I'll give you an example. We had a recommendation to amend the central work rule because of an incident with police. Well, that governs every single employee in the city of Columbus, so we can't amend that or tailor that to police because the Department of Sewers and Department of Water and HR folks and Civil Service and all the various entities utilize that rule, so we can't change that to tailor it to us. That's where our rules of conduct and our division directives come in because we can tailor those just to our division there. So and all that will be spelled out in the quarterly report, every single recommendation of why. And we have made some changes to our policy, or we're in the process of changing policy because of some of the recommendations, just to add some things to give officers a little more direction there. So
Great.
yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned that is really helpful and hopeful is the change of perspective that police have regarding wearing body-worn cameras. Because I know when they came in, at least anecdotally, and officers that I talk with were not happy about that. And they thought that, it's Big Brother watching you all the time or that sort of thing. And then most of the cases that we have, it's actually turned out to the officer's benefit, that the evidence is exonerating officers and protecting them against unfair complaints. I experienced the same thing in talking with officers about the creation of the Civilian Review Board. There was a degree of, suspicion. Wow, would you like to be overseen by a group of people that don't know anything about your profession? And that was, I talked with a number of officers, including, people in the chain of command that were like, I'm not so sure about this. Two things. One, it sounds like maybe that's changing a bit in a more positive direction. But two, is there anything we can do to further the process of decreasing suspicion, defensiveness, that we're not coming in as adversaries? We really are attempting to be neutral arbiters and build a bridge to the community.
I think, some of the things that we talked about, going through the Citizens Police Academy, actually engaging with the officers, because I think that has been one of the most beneficial things, because a lot of times officers, you're not only learning what they do, but they get an opportunity to actually engage with you and get an opportunity to talk to you as individuals and get a chance to hear what you have to say about things that are going on and your beliefs and your views. So getting out more and engaging with the officers, I think, has been very helpful.
Forums that, I know we can go to the academy, like you said. Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of gathering or something that you all could create to, have officers, for that kind of interaction? I'd love to see the suspicion dialed to near zero to the extent that that's humanly possible, but that folks don't feel like they're being attacked.
Yeah, I think that if there are opportunities, we could talk about that in the future. If there are some forums or things that we actually put on ourselves that maybe we can invite you to be a part of, we would absolutely be open to that. So,
how frequently are the events, like I know CPD has community events, or especially during the summer, is it possible, I'm assuming they're on a public calendar somewhere that we could find them, but is it possible for there just to be communication with Ms. Brock, just to say, here are the different events that CPD is doing? I know we have to be careful about more than 5 of us showing up to a place, because then that converts the thing into a public meeting. But in a similar way that we get events about other community things where the board could be present, maybe that would be helpful, Stephanie, if we could have, I don't know, just some sort of like, here's a, pop-up happening in Linden, or here's a, program that's going on that board members could come to and kind of meet some of the officers.
Sure, we can create some sort of calendar, or, we already have calendars that
I
exist,
figured you
obviously,
did, yeah.
for community events, but I can, reach out and get her contact information. And we actually have a deputy chief now that's over our community engagement, Deputy Chief Rock Ally, El Rico Ally. So I could pass that information along and make sure that he's in contact and provides that information so you can know where the various community activities will be.
Perfect, thank you. I had just a couple follow-ups. Chief Bryant, you mentioned both mobile crisis response teams and also mental health accessibility for officers. Is the kind of mental health follow-up, is that still like voluntary, like only as if the officer says, hey, I'd like to engage in this, or
No,
how does
so
that go?
All of our officers since 2018 are required to get crisis intervention trained, and we are in the process of actually training the entire department. Some officers, obviously ones that work like for mobile crisis response, they have more advanced training, but our goal is to have the entire department crisis intervention trained. We want to make sure that every officer has the ability to respond in the best way that they can if they run across a person that's in a mental health crisis. So 2018 and above, all those officers are absolutely crisis intervention trained, and I think we've trained, in addition, maybe another 400 or 500 officers, but our goal is to hit the entire department.
Do you have a projection date for when kind of the folks who came before 2018 would hit that threshold?
That's a good question. No,
Yeah, so we have state, it's kind of a confusing thing. So when we say crisis intervention trained or certified, that is a separate class that is a sanctioned class with a special lesson plan. We also have the state mandated class in the academy that we have added time to make it a full week. And so really, all of our officers are crisis intervention trained, period. And they have a full week of that in the academy. And that's not including extra classes of we have a class specifically for autism interactions and, how to handle service animals and things of that nature. Then in addition to that, since 2018, we've required them to go through the certification class. So they're all trained in crisis intervention, just it's a state mandated lesson plan versus the one that is put on as part of the actual crisis intervention team training program there. And that happens after they graduate the academy. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. But all of our officers are crisis intervention trained.
Is the specialized training, is that 80 hours? How is the?
40-hour class.
40 hours, okay, so it's a week.
week-long class.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm amazed, that was almost exactly an hour. Well, Chief Bryant, and also to remind me of your last name again?
Nick Confis.
Office. Okay. Thank you very, very much, both very much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. I think this has given us space to hear more from you. I'm very excited about the quarterly reports. I'm sure we will have tons of questions after taking a look at them. But I just want to thank you for your time. And the body cams. I think that's probably the icing on the cake for everyone here is just hearing not just that it's happening, but also, Chief Bryant, how much of a priority it is. We appreciate that. And so, thank you. We hope that, hopefully we can make it, because the board does have a revolving door, hopefully we can make these interactions, more regular, so that maybe once a year, or once every other year, we can hear, just to see how you all are updating things. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a 10-minute recess, and when we come back, we will go back to review of pending cases and then June assigned cases. We'll come back at, let's say, 3:10.
It's good that we get those quarterly reports.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just been asking repeatedly.
perfectly on time. It is just now 3:10. I will turn it over to Board Member Strickland for a review of cases pending, starting with 24-0009.
Thank you. So we have case number 240009. Our committee reviewed this case. This was a complaint where the complainant made two allegations where he alleged that on December 2023, he called 911 about his house being shot and no one ever came to make a report. And two, he alleged on January 1st, 2024, shots were fired at his neighbor's house, and when officers responded, an officer stated, quote, "This is the West Side, what do you expect?" End quote. After the review of the investigation pertaining to allegation one, there was no indication or comments on the CAD incident report to indicate that the caller wanted to be seen, and no indication the responding officers were dispatched to the complainant's residence. Therefore, that first allegation is closed with a finding of unfounded. The information from this allegation was referred to the ECC for further review and potential action on their part. Pertaining to allegation two, the investigation found no evidence to substantiate the responding officer said to the complainant, quote, "This is the West Side, what do you expect?" End quote. The footage shows the officer advising the complainant, quote, "People spray off rounds all the time, especially here in the West Side," end quote. The investigation found the officer's statement was not rude or discourteous, but only general information given to the complainant. Therefore, it's recommended that this is closed with the finding of unfounded. Our review committee agreed with the DIG investigation and case number 009. Next case, we have.
Would you like to move?
Do I? No, I don't know.
I mean, or you can move at the
I
end
don't
if
know.
you'd like to.
Can we
move
motion
all.
them all at once, or?
You can.
Yeah, could I do that?
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. So the next is case number 0024. This is a complaint where the complainant alleged an officer who responded to a call to her home was aggressive, abrasive, and pushy. The investigation consisted of a review of the email from the complainant and an interview, and the investigation found no evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation that the officer was aggressive, abrasive, or pushy. Therefore, this allegation is closed with unfounded, and our review committee agreed with the findings of the IG in this case number 0024.
What did the IG review? What was the evidence in this case?
They reviewed, they did the complainant's interview, that they did an interview with the complainant. They also reviewed the body-worn camera footage. They reviewed the unit history and the computer-aided dispatch as well.
Thank you.
Next, we have complaint number 106. Sorry. Make sure that's pulled up. I'm going to skip that because it's not coming up. I'm going to do complaint number 130. It was a case where the complainant made two allegations. So the complainant alleged that on January 28, 2024, he was involved in a hit-skip incident in the parking lot of Walmart Shopping Center. The complainant's two allegations. The first is the complainant stated he approached a parked police unit to request assistance and found the officer asleep. And the second allegation was that the complainant alleged that after he explained the situation to the officer advised him there was nothing he could do because they were on private property. The complainant alleged that the officer failed to do his job as a police officer and should have assisted with the facilitation of the exchange of information. The Columbus Department Inspector General investigation consisted of interviews with the complainant and focus officer, an email response from the Emergency Communications Center, as well as an email response from the CPD Special Duty Unit and video footage from Walmart. Investigation found that the officer was working a special duty assignment at Walmart on January 28, 2024. The officer was sitting in his parked police unit when the complainant approached. The complainant informed the Department of Inspector General he did not have any additional information for review regarding his alleged interaction with the officer. So pertaining to allegation 1, the investigation found no evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation that he found the officer asleep. Therefore, it's recommended that the allegation be closed with a finding of unfounded. Pertaining to the second allegation, the investigation found no evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation that the officer advised him that there was nothing he could do about this because it was on private property. Therefore, it's recommended that allegation 2 be closed with a finding of unfounded. This had quite a pretty decent, lengthy analysis in terms of the details about the process that the investigation went through in terms of emailing the special duty unit, getting a response from CPD, as well as getting information in terms of from Walmart's loss prevention officer, as well as obviously the interview with the complainant. But again, as we've talked about both today and in many other cases here, that the officer was on special duty, so he was not wearing a body-worn camera. And so after reviewing the evidence that they did have, there was no findings that rose to the evidence here, and so that was allegation unfounded on both allegations. They also got a response. They looked into the response with the emergency ECC, and they indicated that there was no accidents that were reported at the Walmart location at that time. So our review committee agrees with the findings of case number 0130, as well as obviously the additional comments which we've made many times here about special duty assignments and wearing body cameras. All right. Next case, we have 145. This is the complaint alleged that her son's father was violating their court order by not returning their child, and officers failed to make him return their child back to her. Complainant also alleged when she went to the police station to further assistance, the officer stated there was nothing further that could be done. Lastly, the complainant alleged an officer lacked compassion for her situation and snatched a brochure from her. The investigation revealed the officers did assist the complainant in attempting to retrieve her son from the child's father's house, however, was not successful as the child's father refused. The officers operated within CPD policy and procedures as they were not able to force the return of the child, and it's recommended this allegation be closed as exonerated. Regarding allegation 2, when the complainant went to the police station for further assistance, the officer stated there was nothing further that could be done. That was an allegation. The investigation found that this did occur, but it was within CPD policy, and therefore the allegation be closed as exonerated, as CPD had followed all policy and all procedures regarding the issue involving the complainant's son's father, and the officer operated within policy to explain there were not any additional steps that could be taken at this time. And our review committee agreed, and then there was allegation 3 regarding the officer lacking compassion for her situation. The investigation found no evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation. Therefore, it is recommended these allegations be closed as unfounded. And our review committee agreed with the findings of the DIG. Next, we have case number 229. There's an allegation here that stemmed from a complainant approaching the officer on the freeway while the complainant's vehicle was being towed. The complainant alleged the officer informed him he could either walk away or be arrested for a warrant. But either way, his vehicle was still being towed. The complainant alleged he did not have a warrant. In addition, throughout the course of the Department Inspector General investigation, body-worn camera was unable to be located from this incident. The investigation consisted of 2 interviews with the complainant, an interview with the focus officer, and a review of Franklin County Municipal Court records, and a review of the Columbus Division of Police Division directives. The investigation revealed that the complainant did have a warrant at the time of this incident. The officer was not in violation of any policy in regards to a statement about the complainant having a warrant. The officer was never able to identify the complainant due to their brief interaction, and the warrant was never able to be fully addressed. CPD's policy permits officers discretion regarding the handling of these types of warrants. Therefore, the Department Inspector General recommends the allegation against the officer in regards to the statement about the warrant be closed as unfounded. Also, the actions not taken by the officer did not violate CPD policy. Additionally, Department Inspector General discovered and was able to confirm that the officer failed to activate his body-worn camera for this incident. Therefore, Columbus Department Inspector General recommends the allegation in regards to body-worn camera usage against the officer be closed as sustained in this case. So the first allegation was unfounded because it was determined within policy. And the second, then there is a sustained Department of Inspector General allegation of sustained because the officer failed to operate his body-worn camera. And so we agree with the finding of the Inspector General in that case, and we can make a motion later as well. Next case is 272. This is where a complaint alleged on February 19, 2024, 2 officers arrived at his residence with felony warrants for his brother's arrest. The complaint alleged that the officers told him, quote, "If we catch him out and about in a car, we will pull up on him and guns drawn. And if he reaches for anything, we will shoot to kill him." Review of the evidence showed that pertaining to allegation of review of the body-worn camera footage for both responding officers, the investigation found no evidence the officers told the complainant that, quote, as the complainant reported. The investigation found the officer advised the complainant if he gets pulled over, he's getting pulled over at gunpoint. Additionally, in review of the body-worn camera footage for both responding officers, the investigation found no evidence that the officer told the complainant, quote, "If he reaches for anything, we will shoot to kill him." The investigation, end quote. The investigation found the officer advised the complainant, the quote, "The worst case scenario is if your brother would reach for his waist or make a sudden move, he could be shot and killed," end quote. The officer concluded his statement to the complainant stating, quote, "I just try to let everyone know the worst case scenario," end quote. In summary, the investigation found the officer told the complainant if his brother was inside of the residence and he would come outside, there would be no harm to his brother, there would be no guns, and he would be taken to jail, and he would see the judge in the morning and be released. The investigation found no evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation be closed with a finding of unfounded. So they go into the process of this body-worn camera footage and reviewing the evidence, and they said that it was kind of a back-and-forth conversation. The reaction and allegations file indicate his perception of the officer's statement. However, the body-worn camera footage showed the officer maintaining a respectful and professional demeanor while conveying the information to the complainant, seemingly with the aim to peacefully have his brother arrested. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation be closed with a finding of unfounded, as the officer's conduct was not determined to violate any CPD policy or procedure. Our review committee agreed with the findings of this particular case in case number 272. Case number 287. This is the complaint alleged that a police officer is in violation of CPD policy regarding social media and civic engagement with their LinkedIn account being physically linked to the Columbus Division of Police LinkedIn account. The Department Inspector General investigation consisted of a review of the complainant's email, an interview with the officer, an interview with the witness, and a review of CPD policy. The investigation revealed that an individual made adjustment to the officer's LinkedIn account under that officer's guidance. It's important to acknowledge that that officer maintains ownership of the account and bears responsibility for ensuring it is compliant with CPD policy. And upon discovering the policy violation, the officer promptly directed the other individual to make the necessary changes and restore their account to compliance. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation against the officer be closed with a finding of sustained, as the officer's account was briefly in violation of CPD policy, but has since been rectified. I don't know, we kind of talked about that one. That's a sustained violation. The officer had a LinkedIn account that was connected. For folks who don't know, it's like you can have an account that's connected to your organization's account, for example. That is in violation of the policy. And so that was addressed and changed, but there was determined to be a policy violation. And so that was a finding of sustained. So there's that. Our committee agreed with the findings of the Department Inspector General on case number 287. I don't have case number 106 up. I'm not sure.
I've got it pulled up.
Thank you so much. Appreciated that.
If you want, Board Member Strickland, I've got it pulled up if you want me to read the summary.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's perfect.
For this was a case from January 23rd, 2024. The complaint alleged that an officer at 11 p.m. at night was going 90 miles an hour with no lights, no sirens in a 65-mile-per-hour zone on 315 northbound, and also turned left on Henderson while the traffic signal was red. So a review of the smart sheet online was conducted, a telephone interview with the complainant, review of global positioning system data, review of the CAD, review of cruiser video system, and of CPD directives. In regards to the allegation about speeding, it was found that the officer in the cruiser was driving on 315 at 90 miles per hour in a 65 miles per hour zone. However, even though this occurred, it was within CPD policy. The officer was on a 1034 run. Therefore, it's recommended that this allegation be closed as exonerated, as the investigation found evidence that the alleged incident happened, but the officer's actions were supported by policy and procedure. Pertaining to the turning left on red, the investigation found no evidence to substantiate this allegation. Therefore, it's recommended that this allegation be closed as unfounded. However, due to the run that the officer was on, if this alleged incident had occurred, it would have still been within CPD policy.
Thank you. And I've got it up. Our review committee agreed with the findings of the Department Inspector General. And we would make a motion to, or I would entertain a motion to accept the findings of our review committee for case numbers 009, 0024, 0106, 0130, 0145, 0229, 0272, 0287.
We've got a motion. Second. Thank you, Dr. Ford. All in favor of it, or I should say first, any other questions on any of those cases? Okay. All in favor of accepting, please raise your hands. All right. Motions carry on each of those cases. Thank you, Board Member Strickland.
Thank you.
All right. Turning it over to now Board Member Pastor Nathan.
This is case number 0054. The complainants allege that the officer wrote harassing and defamatory online video posts on the officer's YouTube channel about the complainant, and also posted harassing comments on the complainant's business website. All this material was posted under a pseudonym. The officer admitted posting some of the material, believed it wasn't defamatory or harassing, but was rather news and information in the public interest, admitted posting videos of the complainant's arrests, and claimed that the complainant was, in which he claimed the complainant was lying. He made statements like, "I can't wait to see the complainant's next arrest," finding by the Department of Inspector General was that the officer did violate CPD policy directives, including the misuse of his personal social media, and did communicate in an offensive and defamatory way. We sustained the DIG's finding that the officer was violating police policy in his use of online media. Regarding case number 220, in this case, the complainant alleged that her minor son, a 15-year-old, was beaten, kicked, and kneed in the face by a special duty CPD officer as a result of being arrested for allegedly stealing a deck of playing cards. Complainant's daughter, who was accompanying her brother, confirmed the complaint. However, the CPD officer claimed that the complainant's son resisted arrest, attempted to headbutt the officer at this Walmart. The Walmart surveillance video confirmed the officer's account. I would note for the record, this is another case of the no body-worn camera evidence for a special duty officer. So the evidence that we had to go, the Inspector General's office had to go on was, first of all, the Walmart camera, which was unfortunately obscured by a pole, and the officer's own testimony. The DIG concluded that the complaint was unfounded. We concurred because of the paucity of evidence. This is case number 0239. Complainant alleged that the CPD officer followed her very aggressively in his cruiser at Easton. She parked, jumped out, and confronted the officer. The officer admitted to following the complainant. There was at that time a bolo to look for a female driver of a white Accord or a Civic who was displaying a firearm. The complainant was driving a white Accord. The officer denied following aggressively and claimed the complainant cursed and screamed at him when she exited the vehicle. Although the officer had a body-worn camera, he didn't turn it on because he was working special duty and he wanted to preserve the battery. There was insufficient evidence to prove that the officer, any officer misconduct. The DIG recommended that the case be closed with a finding of exoneration. We concurred. This is case 0309. The complainant made 4 allegations regarding the officers. First, that the officer came up on him and pointed his weapon at him. Second, that the officer detained and searched him without consent. Third, that the officer slammed him into a police car. And fourth, that the officer was rude to him. The complaint arose from a report of a stolen vehicle. The dispatcher reported that the suspects had ditched the vehicle and were running on foot in the park. The officers arrived at the park. They saw the complainant by a pavilion, detained him, patted him down. Body-worn camera evidence revealed that the officers did not slam him into a car, nor was the officer rude. The DIG found that the officer was within policy to draw his weapon as he was in pursuit of suspects, and so found regarding allegation 1 that they should be exonerated. As to the allegation of unauthorized search and slamming them into the police car or rude behavior, the DIG concluded regarding these 3 allegations that they were unfounded, and we concurred. We did have a question, perhaps for Attorney Tobias. That is, whether there was probable cause to detain the complainant. As I said, there was a report that there were suspects running in the park. When they came upon this complainant, he was standing by a pavilion. And so we just had a question about, did that offer enough? The Inspector General's office responded, well, Stephanie, if you have that, with can't.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I'm, just want me to read this response?
Yes.
There was a reasonable suspicion for detainment of the complainant was the proximity to the last known location of the suspect from a recently committed violent felony and general description the officers had at the time of occurrence.
So we wondered if that rose to the level of probable cause for detaining and the pat-down. And that was just a legal question that we were unable to answer, so I don't know if we're able to pause or if one of the board members who has more experience in criminal law.
Reasonable suspicion. They can pat down on a reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, and did the complainant take off as soon as they saw the officers?
No, well, the complainant was found, we don't, as I read this case, I don't see a statement in here that the officer actually saw the complainant running. Rather, when the officer entered the park, the complainant was standing by the pavilion. The officers had a report that there were two suspects running in the park. They, with a ditched vehicle, they then went into the park, saw this complainant standing by the pavilion at 2 a.m., and then based upon what is said to be a reasonable suspicion, patted him down and detained him. I just, so my question was, is that sufficient?
I mean, I think that not knowing it was 2 o'clock in the morning, if that's the only person they find in the park, then I think an officer would have
Okay.
at least a.
Yeah, I don't know how
And
big the park
as
was.
a defense
I
attorney,
don't
I'm
know.
saying this, like, was there reasonable articulable suspicion? I think that the officer could have made that argument in court and saying if this is the only person in the park, the allegation that this is where the running person was, then that, it's not a high bar, unfortunately.
Okay.
With those
Well, then,
circumstances.
we concurred with the DIG's finding. I just didn't know what the bar was for reasonable suspicion to be able to do a pat-down when they didn't actually see them in the act of running, so.
Yeah, is that, I mean, question for me is that something that we have further insight from the Department Inspector General on or the investigators on? Is that?
I mean, from a law school student perspective, like flight alone is not enough to justify. However, and not knowing, I tried to pull up the complaint to see the report, but not knowing, like, what's the physical description? Did the person match that? Again, I
Yeah,
think.
we didn't
that-
have any evidence of that
that was
that
given.
question. That was, we didn't.
I mean, for reasonable suspicion, and I don't know if this person was arrested and if a case was subsequently filed, but there would be a number of factors that a court would look at to make a final determination as to reasonable articulable suspicion. It's not a very high bar, unfortunately, but a Terry stop would be, let's look at, furtive movements or gestures. I think the fact that it's 2 a.m., so it's not like there's a park full of people in the afternoon and we just pick this one person to
Yeah.
to search.
And the officer's also going to comment on, did he seem sweaty? Was he out of breath? How did he appear for you? The surrounding circumstances.
Yeah, I mean.
And you know,
I understand all that in the abstract,
Yeah.
but we don't have that information here.
right.
Brooke, I forwarded you the responses that the investigators sent to their question.
Okay, thank you, I'll look at that.
The answers in there.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think those answers that Pastor Nathan read off, proximity to last known location of suspects, general description the officers had. So I feel like the officer is saying they had a description and that matched this person. I just don't think that the description is contained in the body of the report. And those would essentially be two of the factors that are given for reasonable articulable, and you don't need all of them. Unfortunately, you don't have to have the full gamut. It could be any of those combination could result in what's necessary to justify a Terry stop.
And if the officer would articulate what this in court, that would probably pass muster in most courtrooms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe, yeah,
I don't know, I understand all that. It would be helpful to have that information, is all.
yeah.
And again, it would be helpful, this is a perfect example, it would be helpful what CPD in their process would determine in this particular instance, and how they would review this process as well. And I don't know, I'm not sure.
Well, given that the officer did claim that he had a description that matched, and that there's at least the argument that, of reasonable suspicion, and given what you're saying, that the bar is low, we would concur with the DIG's finding. I just wasn't sure. This is case 379. The complainant was involved in a traffic accident and alleged the officer failed to file a crash report of the accident. The crash report was not available on the web portal when the complainant sought to obtain it 10 days after the accident, but it was filed 20 days after the accident. The website states that reports on the portal may take up to 6 weeks to file a crash report. The officer's filing was well within the 6 weeks, and so this was closed with a finding of unfounded. We concurred. This is case 381. The complainant alleged he was involved in an accident, and the officer didn't provide him with the other officer's information. The investigation consisted of an interview of the complainant, an interview with the officer, a review of the body-worn camera, and a review of CPD policies. The investigation revealed the officer arrived on the scene, verified there were no injuries, had both parties complete an exchange of information. After the parties completed the exchange of information, the officer provided both drivers with the other party's form, explained this information would be used by their insurance companies. The officer complied with CPD policies and procedures. It's recommended the allegation be closed as unfounded. We concurred. And finally, in case 519, the complainant alleged that as a result of the execution of a narcotics search warrant, the CPD officers did excessive damage to his property. Based on the information obtained, the investigation found that the officers were within policy in deploying multiple baton rounds. I didn't know what a baton round was, but it's apparently a high-velocity round containing wood projectiles fired from a gas gun. It's designed to ricochet off of surfaces and distract any offender. Apparently, they're allowed to deploy these baton rounds during a search for narcotics. They are also allowed to break windows and damage the complainant's door. The damage was within policy and was deemed not excessive, so the recommendation against the officers, the DIG recommended that the complaint be closed as unfounded. And so in case number 54, 220, 239, 309, 379, and 381, I moved to have the committee accept the subcommittee's findings of, in which we agreed with the DIG's findings.
Okay, so I've got a motion. Did you want to include 519 as well?
Did I not have 519? Yes, 519,
Okay.
yep.
May I have
Thank
a
you.
second, please? Okay, any questions on any of those? All right, all in favor of accepting as given, please raise your hands. All right, motions carry. Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go to Board Member Younger.
Number one, February 20th, 2024, the IG received a complaint alleging misconduct by a,
Is this case number 260?
oh, I'm sorry, 2024-0260.
Okay, thank you.
This was an allegation of misconduct. The allegation was that the complainant was stopped twice and cited for multiple citations without an explanation, and also there was an allegation that the officer was rude. The DIG reviewed first the body-worn camera, then, let's see, citations from the Franklin County Municipal Court website, and then CPD policy and procedure. The investigation revealed that the officer initiated a traffic stop with the complainant and followed CPD policy and procedure. The complainant was informed of the reason for both stops. The officer was not at any time rude or discourteous per BWC to this complainant throughout the interaction. It is recommended by the IG that the both allegations be dealt with as unfounded. Number two, 2024-0307. This allegation is misconduct by CPD. The complainant alleged that her daughter was involved in a motor vehicle accident with a drunk driver. The complainant alleged the responding officer, one, did not conduct a proper investigation of the incident by not completing a police report, and two, the officers did not perform a roadside test on the driver that struck her daughter's vehicle. The DIG reviewed the BWC, the CAD, and interviewed the complainant and reviewed all CPD directives and policies. Regarding allegation number one, which was not a proper investigation of the incident, let's see. The officers did not properly investigate the incident, completing the crash. The investigation found that the officer was within policy and was not required to file a report for a collision with no injuries. Therefore, it is recommended that this allegation be closed as exonerated per the Inspector General. As to allegation number two, the officers did not complete a roadside test of the at-fault driver. The investigation found no indication that the officers should have done a field sobriety test on the at-fault driver. Therefore, it is recommended that this allegation against the officer be closed as exonerated. Let's see here. As to allegation number two, the fields are not required if the officers don't see OVI indicators, and here there were none. Number three, 2024-0336, February 27th, 2024, Inspector General received a complaint regarding officer working special duty at Easton Town Center. The complainant alleged, number one, on January 16th, after declining a CPD officer for a date in person, this particular officer asked her on a date via a text message later that day. The complainant also alleged, too, that this CPD officer referred to her as a bitch on February 18th, 2024. So the DIG investigation consisted a review of the email from Easton Town Center Department of Public Safety, an interview of the complainant, an interview of a witness, a review of the security footage from Easton Security, a review of screenshotted text messages received from the complainant, an interview with the focus officer, and a review of CPD policies and procedures. After a review of the evidence, the investigation found no evidence to substantiate the allegation that on January 16, 2024, a CPD officer, after being denied for a date by the complainant in person, asked her on a date via a text message later that day. Therefore, it is recommended that this be closed as unfounded. After all the review, they did not find any evidence of that, and she gave some of the text messages that she gave that to the IG. As it pertains to the allegation that on February 18th, 2024, the officer referred to the complainant as a bitch, the investigation found evidence to substantiate this allegation, making the officer in violation of CPD policy. Therefore, it is recommended that the second allegation be closed as sustained. So, next, 2024-0387. The complainant filed a complaint on March 12, 2024, alleging police misconduct by a CPD officer. The complainant alleged on February 23, 2024, she phoned 911 for assistance and made a request for an officer to respond to her residence to report that she is being harassed by phone by someone who is out of state. The complainant stated an officer responded to her residence and spoke with her. After the officer retrieved the information, he gave her a report number and advised her to seek further advice from the prosecutor's office. The complainant stated a few days later she called the Columbus Police Public Records Unit to retrieve the report and was informed there was no report on file. The complainant alleges the responding officer did not complete a report. The DIG investigated this incident, and they reviewed the BWC, CAD, telephone interviews with the complainant, in-person interview with the officer, information from the EEC, and a review of the applicable police policies and procedures. Pertaining to the allegation in review of the case summary report, the officer responded and retrieved information from the complainant on February 23, 2024. The case summary report was not completed and uploaded by the officer, making it not available for public records until March 15, 2024. The investigation found evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation, and the actions not taken by the officer were a violation of CPD policies and procedures. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation be closed with a finding of sustained for the responding officer. In this case, the officer was interviewed, and he did admit to the error, and he said, "It's on me, should not have delayed it. I feel bad. It looks bad on me." We thought that this officer seemed to really understand what he did, and he learned from this particular thing. And next, case number 2024-0412, March 18th, 2024. Okay, this was a misconduct filing. The complaint stemmed from a traffic stop where he was pulled over at his residence for a traffic offense. The complainant alleged the officer threw him on the ground and beat him up. The DIG's investigation consisted a review of BWC footage, an interview with the complainant, an interview of a witness officer, an interview of the focus officer, a review of the use of force report, and a review of applicable CPD directives. The investigation found the officer's actions to be within CPD policy, and the officer did not beat him up, as alleged during the officer's interaction with the complainant. Therefore, this allegation is recommended to be, by the IG, to be closed as unfounded. And finally, 2024-0594, April 18th, 2024, the Inspector General received an allegation of misconduct. The complaint stemmed from an incident where the complainant was taken for involuntary psychiatric evaluation, known as being pink-slipped. The complainant explained when police came to her residence, the officers had their weapons drawn. The complainant alleged she was treated like a criminal during the encounter where she was pink-slipped. The DIG reviewed the body-worn camera. They also reviewed the CAD, and they reviewed directives. The investigation found no misconduct because the officers did not treat the complainant like a criminal during this incident per BWC. Additionally, the officers were within policy when they pink-slipped the complainant. Therefore, the DIG recommends the allegation against the officers be closed as unfounded. Let's see here. Yes. So we move at this time to have case number 24-260, 24-0307, 24-0336, 24-0387, 24-412, and 24-594. We move that all these be, we concur with all these findings and move that they be accepted.
Second.
Thank you for the second. Any questions? All in favor of accepting those motions as proposed, please raise your hands. Okay. Motions carry. And back to you, Board Member Strickland.
All right. We have the start with case number 066. Really excited about doing that. It's up. It's up. Don't worry, my Wi-Fi is a Wi-Fi issue. That's exactly right. I'm just like,
Yep.
I've got the reports pulled up. My hotspot is there. You go. All right, we're ready. Case number 066. This is where the complainant alleged that the officers were speeding through his neighborhood at 40 to 50 miles per hour, and he followed the officers. 2, the complainant alleged the officers were not wearing seat belts, and when he asked why they were speeding, the officers drove off. The investigation review of the evidence said that in regards to the allegation the officers were speeding in the neighborhood, the investigation found that this did occur, but was within CPD policy. That's Police Division Directive 501, Emergency Vehicle Operations. The officers were responding to a 1017A domestic dispute when they discovered the pursuit from the complainant. Therefore, it's recommended that this allegation be closed as exonerated, as the investigation found evidence that the alleged incident happened, but the officers' allegations were supported by CPD policy and procedures. Regarding the allegation that the officers were not wearing seatbelts and drove off on the complainant, the investigation found no evidence that substantiated this allegation. Therefore, it's recommended that the allegation be closed with finding of unfounded. An additional allegation was noted by the Department Inspector General for both officers failing to activate their body-worn camera during their interaction with the complainant, which is a violation of CPD's policies and procedures. Therefore, it's recommended that that allegation be closed as sustained. And our review committee agreed with the review or the Inspector General's findings in this case. Next, we have case number 214. This is a case where the complainant alleged he was illegally searched and had weapons drawn on him. After review of the evidence in regard to allegation that the officers had their service weapons drawn and removed the complainant from his residence, the investigation found that no misconduct occurred regarding the allegation that officers conducted an illegal search. The investigation did not find that misconduct occurred. It is recommended that the first allegation against both officers be closed as exonerated and the second allegation be closed as unfounded. Quite a lengthy, detailed analysis and report here to kind of walk through the review of the evidence, including the computer-aided dispatch, as well as the body-worn camera footage, and the interviews and the review of the incident reports. There was an interview, several interviews through this process, and the determinations were made that based on the information that they found, the actions were within CPD policy as the officers responded to a gun call where the complainant was reported to police to have threatened his neighbor with a firearm. And so while the response occurred, the allegation is closed with a finding of exonerating as the alleged incident happened in terms of showing up to that call. But the incident response is supported by CPD policies, procedures, and/or laws. Regarding another allegation regarding the illegal search, the investigation found that the officer's actions to be within CPD policies based on the circumstances and information received regarding the gun call, the officer's prior knowledge from his past contacts with the complainant in possession of the firearm, or the individual in possession of the firearm served as a factor in the interest of officer protection and safety practices during his investigation of the incident. Therefore, it's recommended that that be closed with a finding of unfounded. And the allegations against the other officer, allegation 1 exonerated, and allegation 2 is also unfounded in this case. Our review committee agreed with the findings of the Department of Inspector General in case number 214. Case number 259. This is the complainant alleged his television and Xbox were missing when he returned home after being hospitalized. The complainant alleged that the officers did not conduct a proper investigation of the theft incident by not completing a police report as requested. Regarding the allegation that the officers did not conduct a proper investigation of the theft incident by not completing a police report, the investigation confirmed this allegation. It is recommended that the allegation against both officers be closed as sustained. The investigation found evidence that substantiated the complainant's allegation. Per CPD's policy, a theft report to document the officer's investigation of the stolen property should have been completed, and therefore it is a violation of CPD policies, procedures, and directives. And our review committee agreed with the findings of the Department of Inspector General in that case. Next, we have case number 298. This is complaint alleged on February 25th, 2024. She and her granddaughter were in Easton Mall when, quote, 30 kids, end quote, began following her granddaughter. A fight ensued between her granddaughter and another female who was in the crowd. The officer who responded to the fight sprayed her granddaughter in the eyes with mace, and she was not the aggressor. The complaint alleges the officer used excessive force by spraying pepper spray only at her granddaughter. After the review of the evidence pertaining to the allegation, the officer operated within CPD policies and procedures, as he was within policy to use chemical spray if it is directed at the persons participating in the violent conduct, not at the group in general. And it makes a footnote reference to Police Division Directive Chemical Spray and Intermediate Weapons Regulations. That's 204B, 3, and 4A and B. Then it again another lengthy analysis in terms of the process and the facts and circumstances around the case, as well as the evidence, which is interviewing the complainant, interviewing the granddaughter, interviewing the officer at the subject of the complaint, as well as the use of force report, the arrest report, Easton security footage, and the complaints, the complaint itself and body-worn camera footage. After this review, the allegation was unfounded, and our review committee agreed with the finding of the Department of Inspector General for case number 298. We have next, we have case 0477. This is the complainant explained on March 26, 2024, while visiting a friend, someone threw a smoke bomb inside her vehicle and her 2 dogs inside her vehicle perished. The complainant alleged the female officer was rude, discourteous, and berated her by stating, quote, "You're homeless, your stuff doesn't matter, and is over there in the dumpster." In regards to the investigation, which consisted of a review of the body-worn camera footage, information from the Communications Center, email from Internal Affairs Bureau, and a review of applicable CBD policies and procedures, the Columbus Department Inspector General made numerous attempts by phone to reach the complainant for additional information, but never received a response. In regards to the allegation, a review of the body-worn camera footage found no evidence that the officer was rude, discourteous, or berated the complainant as reported. Also, there was no evidence that the officer ever stated, quote, "You're homeless, your stuff doesn't matter, and it is over there in the dumpster," end quote. Therefore, it's recommended that the allegation be closed with a finding of unfounded. Then it goes through a process here where it walks through the investigation and the interviews, or the interview, and then also walking through the body-worn camera footage. And so after that review, we can, walk through the specifics of what occurred, that the report shows there's a caller reporting a female was living in a red Mini Cooper on the side of her house. Someone came by and threw a smoke bomb in her car. The car's smoking. There are 2 animals dead inside. And so there was a process reviewing kind of this situation, what actually occurred, or what occurred in this case. And the officer, they reviewed the body-worn camera footage here. And again, they were not able to contact the complainant for further information. But regarding the allegation, the officer offered for the complainant to wait in the cruiser to, quote, "keep warm" until the fire inspector investigator arrived. And the investigation found no evidence that the officer was rude, discourteous, or berated the complainant, and no evidence that the officer made that statement. Our review committee agrees with the finding of case number 477. Last case here is 588. The complainant stemmed from this complaint stemmed from officers being called to the complainant's residence due to the complainant's mental crisis she was experiencing at the time of the incident. The complainant alleged that she was pushed down to the ground by an officer, and the officer put his knee in her face. The complainant believed the force was excessive. Investigation consisted of the body-worn camera footage, an interview, and a review of the use of force report from the incident. The investigation revealed that the officer's use of force was investigated by CPD, and the officer's actions were reported to be, quote, "reasonable and within policy," end quote. The investigation conducted by Columbus Department Inspector General concurred with the CPD's finding that the officers were within CPD policy, that the officer did not use excessive force during their interaction with the complainant. Additionally, the officer never put his knee on the complainant's face. Therefore, Department Inspector General recommends the allegation against the officer be closed as unfounded. And that was a level 1, it was determined to be a level 1 use of force in this case. I think the only kind of question that comes up doesn't have to be answered today, but based on the conversation we just had was, in this case, in cases like this, you see where CPD does their investigate or does their use of force reports. Is that in use of force reports, or how is that different versus maybe other cases?
So anytime officers use of force, it is investigated by CPD. Normally, what I can tell you what happens is by the time we actually get the complaint, a lot of times the use of force investigation has already been completed. We do request that. We look at the use of force report investigation done by CPD, but we also do our own investigation. And so a lot of times what we just try to put in the report is to let you know that what we looked at, body cam, CAD and everything, it concurred with whatever the CPD's policy was as to the level of force that they can use. So you'll hear us say, yeah, we concur in that it was within policy and procedure. And a lot of times when it's considered or when the allegation is excessive, we'll say reasonable, but what we're saying is that it was within policy and procedure and it's reasonable. Because if the force that they use is excessive, we're not going to concur with that. So it's going to be, sustained, and we would concur that it's excessive.
No, it's super helpful. And a question on that, if the so now like we go through this, we send this to the CPD, the chain of command. Will they just say we've already reviewed, we've already done our investigation, or what does that look like in a case like this?
So what does happen, and that's a great question because that's something that in our office we have had a discussion about, is that because they've already done their use of force and they've already had their conclusion, when we actually look at it, what are we saying? And so we're trying to, we haven't, I will say we don't have a fix right now, because we want to make sure that we're still looking at it, and we also want to make sure that the board is still aware. So we don't want to just get that report and do an administrative closure, and then the board doesn't know about it. So we're still working at how that looks. We don't know whether we're going to, in the future, do it as an administrative closure and let the board know, hey, this is something that was done by CPD, we concur, we're just doing an administrative closure. But in fact, this report does not really have to go to CPD because they've already done their investigation. So that might be something that we do look at, and in the future, if we decide to go that route, then that's just letting the board know, hey, we want you to know this occurred, we want you to know there's a report that was done, but we want you to be aware of the fact that when we got the complaint, we looked at it and we concurred with what the findings were.
Yeah, that's super helpful, because I think it's that gets at earlier of knowing what CPD does or doesn't do in a particular case, or what their investigation process reveals. Here, you all have reviewed that information ahead of time as well and are concurring in this report to us. It's helpful information to have, and so thinking about the administrative closure or some sort of way to get this information across might be a good strategy. But that's super helpful. So. We also concur.
Yeah, and one thing that I can tell you, and Stephanie can tell you also, is we have a process in place. So Stephanie can tell you by the time you all are done doing your review and you do your review, those reports go to Stephanie. Stephanie does take those, they go to the chair to sign off. She can tell you that our time frame as to when it's signed off and goes to the chief, we're usually doing that, within about a week? Yeah, we have a process, so we make sure that, so just letting you know, we have a time frame too. We don't hold on to stuff. That's usually within a week. All of that, everything is submitted to CPD.
Yeah, that's helpful clarification, because it was my understanding, I think most of the board, if not all the board's understanding, that we as a board and the Department of Inspector General were not holding everything up. We've been moving pretty efficiently throughout the process, and so that's helpful additional context. So hopefully we can get all those pieces squared away. But speaking of moving things along, our review committee is done with these sets of cases, and so I would make a motion to accept the recommendations of case number 066, 0214, 0259, 0298, 0477, and 0588 in this case.
And second, and are you also making a recommendation on the additional allegations the IG sustained in 24-0066?
I am making that, if that's how we need to do it,
Awesome.
then that's what I'll do.
May I have a second on that one as well? All right, any questions for Board Member Strickland?
Not from Board Member Strickland, but for the IG.
Could we vote first?
well, we gotta vote.
And then,
Sure.
and then you
Gotta
can,
vote.
absolutely.
Yes, yes.
All right, all in favor of accepting those recommendations and allegations, please raise your hands. All right, motion's carry. Feel free to carry forward with your question.
Has there been a case with the use of force reports where that you can recall, where you did not agree with the finding of the use of force by the chain of command, or?
What I
you-
can tell you is, I know we had a case in which the CPD did a use of force investigation, and we did concur with the use of force investigation, but based on what we saw with the body cam, there was some additional force that occurred prior to the use of force investigation they did. It was a scenario where the complainant was on the steps, and the officer did not tell the complainant to come down the steps. He actually reached up there, grabbed the complainant, pulled the complainant down, and once he pulled the complainant down the steps and then tried to give the complainant to put his hands behind his back, the complainant refused to do that, and there was some force used. What CPD did not look at was the initial part, and so it was not in the use of force report. So while we concur with the use of force report, we added a part that there was some actions that the officer did prior to that, because it was all in the same scenario, that we found, and we did sustain. That would have to be for me to follow up with CPD to see if they agreed with that, but it was just not in the use of force report. They didn't address that. They just addressed the force that was done. So that is the reason why anytime we get the use of force report, we look at everything, because we want to look at the whole scenario that the office is having with the interaction with the person to make a determination as to whether those actions were within policy or procedure, which is the reason why we can't just look at the use of force report. We look at the whole interaction. So to answer your question, in that case, we did concur with the use of force report, but the actions that occurred before, they did not look at that, and we felt like the officer, because the policy states there should be some type of command, and there wasn't. The officer just grabbed the complainant and kind of pulled him down the steps.
Thank you.
Does anyone have anything else for the good of the order?
I do.
Go ahead.
I think as we're in the police process procedure policy section that we're in now, I think that based on today's conversation with CPD, really thinking through how we can alter the way we do our review committee meetings, but then also our full board meetings themselves, right? I know we've got a process in place and we've been doing it, but I think it would be helpful, we have all the insight in the world in terms of how the investigation is being carried through when it comes to the Department Inspector General, reviewing those cases, going through that time and time again. But again, it kind of goes into this black box once it gets to CPD, and we don't have a whole lot of insight in terms of CPD's process, other than thankfully, that discipline sustained disposition sheet is super helpful, and we're grateful for that. But outside of that, from CPD's perspective, we don't get to see their process or to offer our insights to address these broader issues. And I worry that we don't create enough space for that as a board to and I'm glad we now have this policy review section, but the vast majority of our review board meetings are just reading through case assignments that we've already read, and so I'm just trying to think through what that might look like so that we can have a little bit more substantive conversations during our review board meetings that maybe talk about just what we had. This first hour was phenomenal. In terms of having the police chief here to talk about these issues. I was just trying to think through what we could do to shift the structure so that we can get at the heart of a lot of this, because at the end of the day, most of these cases, it's not just about whether something is within policy or not. It's also about practice and patterns. And, there's a lot of things that are within policy that are problematic, right? And so we don't get at that either. And I think there should be more space for us to do that at some point.
Do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, a couple things. So one is, I do. One is the matrix that they were just talking about in terms of they've got a database of complaints and all the complaints and flags with officers and things that come up. Would love to have some sort of public database that we can see complaints filed against particular officers and the types of complaints, and being able to track those complaints and what case numbers look like. And again, I understand that there are certain limitations and certain things need to be redacted and whatnot, but there are a number of things that just having transparency about the process. And again, just like CPD talked about wanting to have more, they don't want these cases to linger. These officers don't want these cases to linger. Well, complainants don't want these cases to linger either, right? We don't want this stuff to linger around. And so how do we get more insight into what is going on, that there's an investigation, there's an ongoing investigation, or the investigation has been concluded and here's where it's at. And I don't know where that needs to come from so that, once we have that information, it then would help our review committees maybe take a look at that, reserve some time instead of just looking at cases the whole time, also looking at the database. What did the database show? Are there, to your questions earlier, are there patterns that we're seeing over time that we can weigh in on? Right now, we don't have the time to do that because most of our time is going through individual case by case.
And is that something, and I know that, they talked about they are tracking some of this to look at patterns. And I think as a board, we've talked about this before. The data analyst person is going to be doing some of that. And I think it's just a matter of, we're moving through the cases, but how can we do a deeper dive into some of those things? In that position, that may help this board with that process.
And so we've listened to the board, and those are some things that we are looking at. We had a discussion, we had a discussion with our management analysts where we're looking to see patterns. So the one thing that we do try to look at is officers where we've gotten frequent complaints from. We also trying to look at specific areas in which those officers work in, because it could be an area in which there's a lot of activities. I think one of the things that we were talking about, and this is just conversation we've had as far as pulling data, was when we look at the officers who we might have frequent complaints of in the system, is how, whatever district they're in, what are the frequent calls that they're getting from that area? Because that also plays a role. If you have an area where there's a lot of calls being made, a lot of the officers out and they're doing a lot of activities, they may be that officer that is getting a lot of complaints. We also want to kind of focus on complaints that we're getting that we're able to sustain, whether the officer's actions did amount to misconduct. And we also want to look at, what the type of complaint is too, because just because we weren't able to sustain the officer doesn't necessarily mean that there's not something going on with those actions. So these are conversations that me and the management analysts have talked about, and so we are in the process of trying to pull some of that data, look at some of that data, and we want to be able to bring that to the board, but we just want to make sure that if there's some questions that you might have, that we'll be able to say, be able to answer that and not just pinpoint somebody that has a lot of complaints that might just be out there doing their work, but really looking if there's a pattern of something going on with the officer. And again, we would like to kind of have a conversation with CPD too to see, we know what complaints we get, but because of use of force reports and stuff, we would only look at, obviously, if we have a complaint. It'd be nice to kind of have that conversation with CPD to say, hey, this is an officer that's kind of on our radar. Do you guys have anything in your database that might also kind of have something going on, and maybe be able to provide that information to them?
That's great. And apologies, I might have missed that. That person is on board and
Yes.
started? Oh, that's great.
Yes, they are.
I think that would be nice to be able to cross-reference. So if the CPD is giving us a quarterly report that shows us outcomes and sustained, I know that one of the things, like one of the cases from today, is an officer who has had multiple cases, multiple complaints written about them, several of them in the same nature, let's say. And then I remember from our first couple of months of review, we had an officer, I think, showed up 3 times for very similar complaints. And so I would love to be able to see, to the extent, since we've been in operation, who are the officers who've had, let's say, more than 2 complaints, right? And then if we can maybe see what those outcomes have looked like. Because I am interested in how Chief Bryant was talking about progressive discipline. I am interested in what are the outcomes of the officers we've seen repeatedly, and how is that kind of fleshing out? Because I wonder if we have incidents of towing the line maybe, or maybe 3 out of 4 are unfounded, but it's repeated behavior, and kind of how is it that chain of command is looking at that? Could there be independent action for additional training or something like that when we've had multiple and repeated incidents from different community members?
And I think to your question about recommendation, I think the other is to seriously consider, and I don't know what legal counsel would say on this, is this concurrent process of
Yep, I've got that noted
when
already.
you all complete your investigation, it then gets sent to CPD, and then figuring out the role that we play as a board to weigh in on a particular situation.
I would have some questions about that, Kyle, because my concern would be that once the ball is rolling in CPD and their internal affairs and all of that, if they've arrived at a conclusion, I would be concerned about the real marginalization of the DIG and that's precisely why the DIG's office exists and why we exist. The STEP process says we've got an independent look at what's happening with an officer, and then we turn it over to them, and they are at least having to deal with what we've come up with. The concurrent process, by way of contrast, could be they're moving down a pathway that they would have already moved down. They don't have our information already. So while that might be more efficient to run parallel tracks, I'm just concerned that it would marginalize the board and the DIG's office.
And that's a great point, but to that point, the argument that I would make is that we have redundancies in our current independent structure. So first, the independent review process primarily is done by the Department Inspector General. They go through the investigation, they see through everything. We then, as a review committee, review these reports, but we're not looking through all the additional evidence on each time. And so there's a reason that it's 99.5%, or so we agree and we move on. There might be some disagreements, but for the most part, it's moving forward. My argument would be to actually have us focus in energy-wise on the cases where the IG comes up with one determination, the CPD comes up with another determination, and there's disagreement, and really honing in on, as a review committee, we've looked at these cases, and we want to highlight why we think there is X, Y, and Z was done in a particular case after the fact. And so I think right now you can make the same argument that it's happening is, okay, they see what we've, a few comments here and there, but they're going to go out and do what they're going to do regardless. To me, it's not clear what role we're playing as a board that is dispositive, that changes the way that CPD does their process that couldn't also just happen hearing it straight from the Department Inspector General. It would be a different story if we had a DIG's office that was just missing a bunch of things. But what we've seen and what we've determined based on the last several years of doing this is that they're crossing the T's and dotting I's. And
My response to our role would be that I don't know, I have no information one way or another whether the police department or IA would have raised the alarm on special duty officer body cams. I think the place that we come in is by our recommendations. It's not so much the individual cases, but we're independently taking a look at patterns that we're getting, and this is the 4th, 5th, 9th time that we've seen a special duty officer not have a body cam. That's a problem. Here's a situation involving, some of the more egregious cases that we've had. We have made policy recommendations. I think that front end look, I'm not sure that those guys would do it. On the other hand, if all we were looking at was conflicts, maybe the DIG would pick up on that. Maybe they would not pick up on that. And maybe IA would pick up on it, maybe they wouldn't.
So you're right. I would revise. So I think we should still focus our energy on where some of those conflicts are. With that said, you could still do this process and not just focus on where the disagreements are. Yeah. You can focus on all the cases, but it's after CPD weighs in. And what I would argue is that in that situation, we would be able to identify even more policies because we're so zoomed in right now on each case that it is hard to step back and see, okay, what the patterns are. And so I think
It seems to me, and you can help me out here, it seems to me that the voters wanted a civilian review board to handle their, and help me out, to review and to handle their complaints. They want us to deal with policy, but they also want us to deal with individuals. And what I see here is we, the Inspector General and the Civilian Review Board, are independent of the chain of command. And if we have the Inspector General and the chain of command working simultaneously or together, and then we move in to review conflicts, then we have a triumvirate. We have the chain of command, the Inspector General, and us working together. And it's not what the voters want. The voters want the DIG and the Civilian Review Board together and the chain of command separate. I personally want the chain of command separate from us, the Inspector General.
Yeah, I think
If I could just interject briefly on the conflict piece, I can imagine Mr. Tobias, if he was here, saying, but wait a second, by the time it hits CPD's decision-making, our authority is done, is limited.
what's our authority right now?
Our authority is turning over to chain of command and making those recommendations. So we can make recommendations to the chain of command. I think where we could do something with the quarterly reports that come back from the chief of police's office is we could see, that's why I asked the question of how detailed is the quarterly report that we're going to get back from them? Because I'd like to see that. Because I think at that point, we could say, all right, with this information that we have, how do we feel about the outcomes of recommendations we made that perhaps weren't followed or weren't taken or adopted? How does that then maybe change our structure for recommendations moving forward? I think also we have to consider we haven't yet heard the update on the FOP contract, which is another meeting where we're going to have somebody come in and explain, here's what's new, here's what our limitations are. So I think that quarterly report can inform maybe the future recommendations we make, but we aren't going to be able to be arbiters of disagreement between the IG and our recommendations and then the chain of command, because I think that exceeds our scope of authority.
So I think you can look at the outcomes of investigations. As a review committee, we can look at outcomes of investigations that have been completed by the IG, that have been completed by CPD. And you, from there, after seeing those outcomes and seeing patterns and practices, and again, it's not like we don't see the cases. Like we still can review and see the cases, but we as a board would focus in on the outcomes, and we can still make recommendations. There's nothing that limits our authority to make recommendations. Quite frankly, we make recommendations often that, I mean, we can make recommendations, nothing makes them binding. And so I don't think we lose our authority by the time it gets to CPD. Because, for example, let's say we review a case and we make a recommendation, goes to CPD, and again, as we've seen before, it often goes in a black box. We don't really know what happens from there. I mean, we've already given up our authority by that point in time. So I don't think us, I don't think this is the moment, this is the point where, we have the most power as a review board. I do think if we weigh in on outcomes and process and what follow-up looks like, not only will we address policy recommendation, but we'll have a better understanding on their process. I mean, I don't even know, does CPD have any sort of communications with residents? Or I don't even know what happens through these processes moving forward. And so having a sense of what the disposition is, putting more time and energy on that, I think might be more beneficial in the long run.
And I don't disagree with you about, we won't see dispositions till we get their quarterly report,
Of course,
right?
of course.
And they just created that process.
But why do we have to wait? I guess why do we have to wait that long?
I don't know at what point the chief decided that was going to be part of the process.
Because we shouldn't have to
I don't
wait
know,
that
Inspector. Well, but here's the thing too, is we heard directly from them that they didn't expect to wait 6 months to start hearing from us on our first batch of cases. So I think especially when we consider all of this is new. And so I'm not sure at what point Chief Bryant decided, well, let's give them a quarterly report, because we've been asking for it. I'm glad they have, and I would love to see it. I don't know that we can tell at this juncture what we're going to be able to do with that report. I think we can give feedback and say, hey, this is great. Could we potentially have this additional information or more granular information on these outcomes? I think we can ask for that, but I don't think we can in this moment kind of nitpick what's in it if we haven't seen it. And I want to give the Inspector General an opportunity, because I think that question of timing, when did they decide this, sparked a potential response.
And what I wanted to just say is, again, first of all, the process and everything is new. What we're hearing is CPD, along with the FOP, they're speaking on the timelines that occurred in the beginning. Let's be understanding those timelines aren't occurring anymore. Literally, when we're closing our cases within 90 days, up to the day of the board meeting, even today, we're sending you have cases. So most of what the board is doing now is you guys have the cases for 30 days. The next meeting, we're closing those cases. So on average, the cases are being done in 90 days, you're getting them, so that's another 30 days. It's nothing like before. We submit them over to the chief. Now, one thing the chief mentioned, and we can work on that, we do have packages together for IAB for them to get all that information. But we have talked about doing drop boxes and throwing the information in there so IAB can just pull that out. We just haven't worked on that. We can work that out. Whatever they ask for, we get them. But what we can tell you is their process as to when we send it to them and it goes to the chain of command, it's not occurring within 30, 60 days, because we've sent memos. When we've looked for feedback, we've sent memos to say, hey, we kind of give them the courtesy of 4 months. After 4 months, if we haven't gotten feedback, we're sending memos and saying, hey, we haven't gotten anything back. Until, just to give the chief credit, when we sent those memos out, she's followed up and we started getting a bunch of stuff. So it's still a learning process. So I understand, I just want to put that out. When we start talking about the time frame, understand that the beginning time frame, that was the beginning. That doesn't exist anymore. So we are definitely getting things. Yeah, it might take a case to be a little bit longer, but those are cases that go through criminal prosecution in which we have talked to CPD and they agree we're not investigating it at that point in time because Garrity and Miranda, so those cases, those are exception. But for the most part, we are meeting the timelines. The board is meeting that 30-day turnaround timeline. And if you have questions, you're giving those questions to us. We're answering those questions. There are exceptions, but there's always exceptions. But those timelines, I just want you to understand, the beginning timelines don't exist anymore.
No, and I think that's super helpful and underscores the point that I think we've been on this board for some time now, some newer members, but we've been on this board. Most of the questions that we have are not for the IG. I mean, they're for the IG to get from CPD, but there's a lot of the process points that we don't get a lot of insight into in terms of what CPD's process and practices are. And, there were statements about, some folks are upset about, feelings and not facts in the law. Now, I would love to learn more about process and about practice. And there's just some insight that we're not getting insight on. And so I thought this was a great first step in terms of having the police chief here and the system, to be here to have these conversations. But I really do think in terms of the energy that we spend, people volunteer, everybody's volunteering their hours to review these cases. I think there is a legitimate question of impact, and it's hard to get a sense of what the impact is when we don't know what is happening. And that's not on the IG, that's not on the board, that's just on maybe thinking through a process that can be a little bit more focused on, not just this point, but the endpoints, the outcomes, when decisions are made, then following up, like the IG does. How do we then follow up with CPD about what happened here? Why is this continuing to happen? Why are we seeing patterns? So hopefully, whether we do a special committee or whatever it might be, I think that's where a lot of our energy should go, especially while we are under. The other thing I just want to say, the process for appointing board members, we've had vacancies for quite some time, and it's a slow process to become a full board. And so I think there are steps and changes that could be made to hopefully make that more efficient as well.
I would love to hear them, because I have followed up with the mayor's office monthly, if not before then. We did have a board member who was about to be seated, who withdrew. And to my knowledge, I've not yet received back a response from Mr. Sims at the mayor's office, but I inquired about pending applications. I would encourage community members, if you have never applied to be a board member, we have currently 2 seats. We soon will have 3 seats because we are losing Ms. Pinkleton after this meeting. And so we absolutely need to have additional board members, and that process has been very slow. So,
I think that city council should be more involved in the process. And so I know, obviously I know what's in charter and who makes decisions and the mayor making the decision, but I do think that city council could probably, play more of a role. I don't know when it comes to civilian review board process. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if they're playing a role behind the scenes, but that might be something that would be useful, especially when it comes to the appointment process.
well, I will not get into because there definitely is authority for both the mayor's office. City council does play a role in confirming folks, but I would encourage people, if you're interested in serving on the board, we do have 2, soon to be 3 vacancies, and would love to be able to complete our 11-person board. Anything else? Yes.
I just wanted to say one thing about that, since I will be leaving, and it has been an honor. I said this in my letter, resigning, an honor to serve with you all the past year. Apologies to you all, of course, in the city, that I am moving out of the city, so I'm no longer able to serve. But the one thing that's been, I think, clear to me And in individual conversations I've had with some of you all, and certainly I think Board Member Strickland, you're talking about this, to have a board that, and for some of you from its infancy, that built this, and keep wanting to ask the question and figure out and muddle through that, how do we have impact, you said? How are we operating efficiently? How can we be more effective? And I'll be on the sidelines for the future of it, but I think that to still be asking those questions and the desire exists on this board to respond in even greater ways to the community speaks volumes, I think, to each of you all. So I'll be excited to watch it grow, and welcome to Board Member Jackson. And yeah, I agree with Chair Burns. Folks are interested, get on the board, finish out my few years I didn't, and it's just been an honor to serve with you all. And certainly to get to know the folks in the IG's office. And Stephanie, thank you for everything, keeping us on our toes and the train running down the tracks.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Your leadership has been fantastic, and appreciate your service.
Yep, I would like to thank Board Member Pinkleton for being with us and for being willing to serve. It's been an honor to have you, and we'll miss you. All right, anything else for the good of the order? All right, I'm going to follow up with Mr. Tobias and Ms. Ross, specifically about whether there is any issues and what those might be with co-occurring. And for me, it's not that the chain of command gets to do things. I just want to make sure that from a timeliness perspective, they have what they need. Is there a problem with them at least knowing what a recommendation is that's coming, knowing that the board has yet to vote, and that once it's finalized, they should be allowed to move forward? I will check and see what restrictions we might have about that, and if the city's office has any concerns about kind of refiguring or figuring out some sort of process that works for that. All right. If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
May I have a second? All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion adjourned. Thank you.